Hello, it's Anja here again with an update on how we're caring for our collections during lockdown. The library may be closed and empty of people, but the books are still there on the shelves and still in need of a bit of care and attention. We've been visiting the building frequently to do security checks, but I've also been going in about once a month to do conservation checks. I thought you might be interested to know what exactly I've been doing, so when I was there on Friday, the 15th of May, I took a few photos whilst I was working. One of the first things I did when I came into the library was to open all the internal doors in order to get some airflow around the building. If the doors are left closed, they can start to form microclimates in the different rooms, which can aid the growth of mould. This is particularly important in areas which sometimes have a high humidity, such as the darkroom and its annex up in the attics. Opening the doors allows the air to move around and reduces the likelihood of mould taking hold. While walking around opening the doors, I also kept an eye out for any sign that this was happening, including feeling the walls for damp and taking a few books at random off the shelves to flick through and see that they were okay. You'll be pleased to know that I didn't spot any mould during this check. Looking for mould is one important check to undertake in the collections, and another is checking for any signs of the presence of pests. There are various insects which can be attracted to books and bookcases looking for food, and it's important to spot any infestations as soon as possible, so that we can undertake quarantining and freezing to kill the pests and stop them spreading. A visual check of the collections showed no sign of books with damage from hungry grubs, and no signs of frass along the bottoms of the bookcases. Frass is the dust-like waste substance which insects produce from their eating, and is especially indicative of woodworm infestations, so I'm very glad I didn't see any of that. To get more detailed information about what's going on in the insect world at the library, we also need to put out traps to see which species are present. The green and white cardboard strips which you can see here are insect traps. The cardboard has a very sticky adhesive over part of the white side, such that when the strip is folded into a triangular shape like this, the sticky surface is on the inside. They basically form a tunnel with a sticky floor. The idea is that insects will walk into the tunnel and get stuck, so that when we collect the trap, we can see which insects are present in the area where the trap was. We normally have a few insect traps out in the library, in the areas where the most fragile books are stored. However, since the library is currently mostly empty of people, I've taken the opportunity to put out many more traps than usual. I've basically peppered the whole building with them. They're on windowsills and by fireplaces, which are classic points of entry for insects, around the skirting boards where crawling insects like to run, and on top of some of the shelves behind the books. I will collect them all back next time I visit, and will thus hopefully get a really good idea of what is present in all the different parts of the building, and whether any of them could pose a danger to our books. Another potential for pest damage in historic buildings is the presence of rodents. Mice, in particular, often find their way into buildings and can damage book collections by nibbling on bindings or tearing up paper for nest material. Mice tend to follow the same paths around their territories, and in buildings they like to be at the edges of rooms running along the walls. I therefore checked for the presence of mice by scanning along the edges of all the rooms using two different techniques. Firstly, I checked for droppings, and secondly, I shone a UV light along the floor. This might sound a bit strange, but mouse urine actually reacts to UV light and shows up as a glowing trail. Both these checks confirmed that there is no evidence of mice in the library at the moment. Having checked for mould growth and the presence of pests, I then went on to gather data on the environmental conditions in the library. Extremes of temperature and humidity can damage books, and rapid fluctuations in either of those conditions can also be very damaging, causing bindings and paper to stretch and shrink, warp and crack. We monitor the conditions in the library continuously, using digital monitors like the ones you can see here. Some of them just record the maximum and minimum temperature and humidity since the last check, but some of them are more sophisticated and take a reading every 5 minutes, which they store. I can download these stored data onto my laptop and thus get an almost continuous picture of the conditions in the library over the last month. The data loggers produce graphs like this one, from the logger which is in the locked cabinet next to the counter in the main room. Seeing this makes me very happy. The graphs might look variable, but the ranges of temperature and humidity which they are showing are actually very small, so the wobbles in the lines represent only very small fluctuations. The top graph is for humidity, which has only varied between 42 and 50% RH over the last month. The bottom graph shows temperature from about 15.7 to 18.3 degrees C. These graphs therefore show that the environment the books are being stored in is currently very stable in terms of temperature and humidity, so won't be causing them any damage. The final thing which I checked was the light coming into the library. Both visible and UV light can damage books and bindings by fading them and making them brittle. We try to counter this by putting filters on some of our windows. Many of the rooms in the library have a film on the windows which filters out much of the UV wavelength from the sunlight, and the glass in the new windows in the attics has this sort of filter within it as standard. We also reduce the visual light coming into the rooms, of course, by closing blinds, curtains and shutters when the library is closed. My final conservation check on Friday, therefore, was to make sure that all the windows were shielded in this way before I left the books, tucked up and as safe as we can make them.